The hand went back, and for a breath the whole east colonnade held its air like a lung too frightened to empty. I have stood a great many posts in my years under the crown, and I have learned that the loudest thing in any room is not a shout but the half-second before a blow, the small, ugly hush in which everyone present chooses, without knowing they are choosing, whether they will look away. I did not look away. It was not my place to look away. I was the reason her hand had gone back. My name is Edrin Hale, and on that gray morning in the month the almond trees along the long water first show their color, I was posted at the inner arch of the east colonnade of the Palace of Harrogate, in the kingdom of Eldermore, guarding a door that the Queen Consort Morwenna intended to walk through, and that I had, in the plainest and quietest voice I own, told her she could not. I want to be careful in the telling of this, because it would be easy to make it a story about a woman's temper and a man's stubbornness, and it was neither. It was about a door, and what lay behind it, and a written order older than her marriage, and a boy of 6 who was asleep upstairs, and did not know that his whole day had come to hang on whether a guardsman flinched. So let me set my post, and let me set the morning, and let me tell it the way it came at me, fast, and without warning, the way most true things arrive. The East Colonnade is the quietest of the 4 great galleries that ring the inner court of Harrogate. The other 3 are for show. The tourists file through them in the appointed hours. The state portraits hang there. The gilded railings are polished twice a day by men with soft cloths and sore backs. The East Colonnade shows nothing. It runs along the shaded side of the palace, and its windows look not out at the forecourt where the crowds gather but inward, at a small walled garden that the late Queen Isolde had loved, and that no one had troubled to change in the years since her death. At the far end of the colonnade there is a plain oak door with an iron lock, and behind that door is a narrow stair, and at the top of the stair are the old nursery rooms of the royal children. That is the door I guarded. That is the door she came for. I had come on post at the 6th hour, relieving a younger man named Torvin who had the yawning, hollow look of the last hours of a night watch. He handed me the ring of keys and the watch-book, and told me the night had been nothing, a maid up early, a cat in the garden, the old plumbing knocking in the walls the way it always did when the season turned. I signed the book. I checked the lock. I set my back to the cold stone between the 2 lamps that are never lit in daylight, and I began the long stillness that is the whole of a guardsman's craft, and the whole of what the world thinks it understands about us and does not. They think the stillness is emptiness, that a man who stands a post for hours has gone away somewhere behind his own eyes. It is the opposite. When you stand a post correctly, you are more awake than you have ever been in your bed or at your table. You hear the palace breathing. You learn its ordinary sounds so exactly that the extraordinary one, a door that should not open, a step that does not belong, a voice pitched half a note too high, arrives in your ear like a struck bell. Stillness is not the absence of motion. It is motion held so tightly that it becomes a tension. So when I heard, at a little past the 8th hour, the tap of hard heels coming down the colonnade toward me with the particular briskness of a person who means to be obeyed, I knew 3 things before I had turned my eyes a hair's breadth to confirm them. I knew it was a woman. I knew she was angry. Anger has a rhythm, a clipped forward lean in the stride. And I knew, from the 2 lighter, softer sets of footsteps hurrying behind her and failing to keep up, that she had come with attendants who did not want to be there. The Queen Consort Morwenna came into the light of the colonnade windows the way she came into every room, as though the room had been waiting for her, and had been foolish to think it could go on without her. She was a handsome woman in the hard, bright way of a blade held up to a window. She wore gray that morning, the pale, severe gray she favored when she meant business, and at her throat a single dark stone that caught the window light and threw it back cold. Behind her came a lady of her household whose name I will not use, because she behaved better than her mistress and does not deserve to be tied to this. And behind the lady came a man of the palace staff carrying a folded traveling cloak, and the anxious face of a man who has been given an errand. He does not understand and suspects is a mistake. She stopped 6 paces from me and looked at the door, and then she looked at me, and I saw her decide that I was furniture. "Open it," she said. I did not move. I did not answer at once. The first rule of the post is that you do not enter a conversation you have not been ordered to enter. The second is that when you must speak, you speak once plainly, and then you let the silence do the rest. "The door is sealed by standing order, Your Majesty," I said. "It cannot be opened this morning." I will tell you what I did not say, because the things a guardsman does not say are half his discipline. I did not say by whose order. I did not say why. I did not say that the order was older than her tenure at Harrogate, that it had been signed by the king himself in the 2nd year of his grief, and lodged with the captain of the guard and the steward of the household both, and that it named this door, this stair, these rooms, and forbade their opening to any person save the king, the crown prince, the children's own governess, and the physician, and that her name appeared on it only in the line that listed those who were to be turned away. I did not say that the reason for the seal was a small red-headed boy named Bram, 6 years old, who slept badly in strange rooms and had been given the old nursery precisely because it was the one place in the palace that had never been rearranged to please anyone, the one place that still smelled, faintly and only to those who remembered, of his grandmother, the late queen. I did not say any of that. It was not mine to say. It was mine to stand. "I did not ask you the state of the door," she said. "I told you to open it. Do you know who I am?" "You are the Queen Consort," I said. "The order stands, Your Majesty." Something crossed her face then, a flicker, quickly mastered, that I have thought about often in the years since. It was not surprise. She had met refusal before. A woman who climbs as she had climbed learns the shape of the word no from below and spends the rest of her life avenging herself on it from above. It was something closer to insult, but insult of a very particular flavor. The insult of being reminded, by a man she considered beneath notice, that there existed a will in the world stronger than her wanting. I have seen that flicker in powerful people all my life. It is the exact moment the arrogance is offered its choice, to bend, or to break itself against the thing that will not move, and I have almost never seen it choose to bend. "Bring me the key," she said, and held out her gloved hand. "I cannot, Your Majesty." "You cannot." She said it slowly, tasting it, and her voice had begun to rise off its measured perch. "You cannot. You wear the king's coat and stand in the king's house, and you tell me, his wife, that you cannot asterisk." She took a step toward me. Behind her the lady of her household made a small, involuntary sound, half a word, and stopped herself. "Open the door, or I will have your coat off your back by nightfall, and you will be shoveling the mews before the week is out." A threat like that is not empty. She could do it not lawfully, for the guard is the king's and answers to the captain and above him, to the king alone. But a queen consort of Eldermore has ways of making a man's life at court into a slow misery, of finding him always the worst posts and never the good ones, of seeing his name spoken in the wrong rooms until it is a name no one wishes to be tied to. She could not dismiss me. She could unmake me by inches. She knew it, and she meant me to know she knew it, and she watched my face for the small crack that would tell her the inches had begun their work. They did not begin. I want to be honest and say it was not courage, or not only courage. It was the order. When you have a written order in your hand, even when the paper is locked in the steward's cabinet and only its weight is in your hand, you are not, in the moment, a man deciding whether to be brave. You are a hinge on which a lawful thing turns. The bravery, if there is any, was spent long before, by the men who wrote the order and signed it and meant it to hold when they were not there to enforce it. My part was only not to be the place where it failed. "The order names those who may open this door, Your Majesty," I said. "I am not empowered to set it aside. If you wish it lifted, the captain of the guard or the steward of the household can be sent for, and the king's leave sought. I will send a man for either or both this instant." It was the correct answer. It was the answer the order itself would have given if the order could speak. And it was, I understood even as I gave it, exactly the wrong answer to give a woman like Morwenna, because it did the one thing her whole life had been arranged to prevent. It told her, calmly and in front of witnesses, that she was not the highest authority in the corridor. That there was a paper she could not overrule, and a chain of men she would have to petition, and a king whose leave she would have to seek to walk through a door in her own house. Her color came up. I saw it climb her throat past the dark stone and into her cheeks, and I saw her hands close, and I understood a beat, perhaps 2 beats before it happened, that the choice offered by that flicker had been made, and that it had chosen to break itself against me rather than bend. "You insolent," she began, and I never learned the noun, because on the word the hand came up. It came up fast, faster than I would have credited, from a woman who wore her dignity like armor plate. There was a whole life's held rage behind it, and rage lends a shocking quickness to a body that has spent decades being careful. The gloved hand rose off the folded cloak and drew back past her own shoulder, palm open, and every muscle in it was aimed at the side of my face, at the cheek below the strap of my bearskin, at the one part of a guardsman that is bare to the world, and that no one in the long code of the palace is permitted to touch. I did not move to stop it. Understand that. It is the hardest thing in the craft and the thing that no one believes when I describe it. I was not permitted to raise my own hand to hers. To strike the Queen Consort, even to seize her wrist, even to turn a blow, is a crime a guardsman does not walk back from, and more than that, it would have made me, in the eye of every witness and every later telling, the aggressor, the brute who laid hands on the king's wife. The order in my keeping did not authorize me to defend my own face. It authorized me to defend a door. So I did the only thing the craft allowed. I set my eyes forward, and I fixed my weight, and I made of myself the thing I had been trained across 10 hard years to become, a wall that receives and does not answer, and I waited to be struck. The hand came down. It did not land. Because in the half-second I have told you about the hush before the blow, the small, ugly hush in which everyone chooses. One other person in that colonnade had chosen, and had already moved, and was faster than her rage. A hand closed around her wrist in the air, not mine. A larger hand, brown and strong and marked across the back with an old scar, and it stopped the blow 4 inches from my cheek with an ease that spoke of a man who had done such things when it mattered, long ago, and had never forgotten how. The gloved hand strained against it once and could not move. And a voice, low and level and terrible in the way that only a very quiet voice from a very powerful man can be terrible, said, "No." I did not have to turn my eyes to know it. The whole colonnade knew it. The lady of the household went white and sank at once into a curtsy, so deep it was almost a collapse. The anxious man with the cloak dropped to one knee and stayed there. The word came from the far arch, from the direction of the king's private apartments, and it was the king. King Alaric of Eldermore had come into the colonnade behind the little procession without one of us hearing him, because a king who has been a soldier learns to move quietly in his own house, and had crossed the distance between the far arch and the sealed door, in the time it took his wife to lose the last of her self-command. He stood now at my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of him, the near presence of the man himself, which in 10 years of guarding his family I had almost never felt, and he held his wife's wrist stopped in the cold window light, and he did not let it go. For a long moment, no one in the east colonnade breathed. "Alaric," she said. Her voice had changed entirely. The command had gone out of it and something else had come in, something that reached for the old private tone between 2 married people, the tone that says this is between us, not for them, send them away and let us speak. "Alaric, you don't understand what this man—" "I understand," the king said, "that I watched you raise your hand to a man who has stood at that door all morning and given you nothing but the truth. I watched it from that arch. Do not tell me what I do not understand, Morwenna. I understand exactly what I saw. He let go of her wrist. He let it go gently, even there was no violence in him. And I want that recorded, because the story that ran through the palace by nightfall made him out to have flung her back, and he did nothing of the kind. He simply opened his hand and let her lower her own arm, and then he stepped, unhurried, so that he stood between his wife and me, facing her, his back to me, and the message of that single movement was louder than any word he could have spoken. It said, "This man is under my hand now, and you will come through me." And I, who was not permitted to move, stood at my post behind the King of Eldermore, and understood that whatever else this morning was going to be, it had just become the sort of morning that men tell their grandchildren about, and that I had better remember every second of it, because, in the years to come many people were going to want to know exactly what happened next. What happened next is the whole of this story, and it did not end in the colonnade. It had barely begun. To understand the morning, you have to understand how it came to be that a queen consort would want a nursery door opened badly enough to strike a guardsman for it. I did not understand it myself, standing there. I knew only my order and my post. The rest I pieced together afterward, from the king's own account and from the governess and from a boy who told me, months later, in the plain, unafraid way that boys have, exactly what had happened in the days before that door was sealed. I will give it to you now, out of order, because you deserve to know what she was reaching for before I tell you what the king did about it. Bram, the youngest of the royal children, was 6 years old that spring, a small red-headed boy with his late grandmother's coloring, and a stammer that came and went with his nerves. He was the son of the crown Prince Rowan, and grandson of the king, and he was, as the youngest often are, the least considered and the most watched-over member of the household all at once. He had lost his mother young, as his father had lost his mother young, and the two losses had made a quiet bond between the king and the smallest of his grandchildren, that the rest of the court found it convenient to forget. The old nursery had been the late Queen Isolde's own choosing. When Rowan was a boy, she had furnished those upper rooms herself, against the advice of the household, in plain warm wood and faded blue, with a window seat that looked down into her walled garden, and a low shelf of books that she read aloud in the evenings in a voice that people who heard it still spoke of, 20 years on, in the hushed tones reserved for things that cannot be had again. When she died, the king had ordered, this is in the record, anyone may see it, that those rooms not be touched. Not out of morbidity, out of a soldier's understanding that a house needs one room that grief has not been allowed to redecorate, one place a child of the blood might sleep and feel, without being able to name it, that he was held. And into that room, that spring, had come the Queen Consort Morwenna's ambition. She had a son of her own, Lord Cassius, a grown man of expensive habits and thin patience, and a daughter, Lady Verena, and she had spent the years of her marriage in the long, slow work of moving her own line closer to the center of the house and the king's other line, Rowan's line, Isolde's line, a little further from it each season. It was done in small things: a room reassigned, a portrait moved to a dimmer wall, a servant of the old household pensioned off and replaced by one of hers. None of it was a crime. All of it was a current, and the current ran one way, and the way it ran was toward the day when the things that had been the late Queen Isolde's, her rooms, her garden, her jewels, her place in the story the palace told about itself, would belong instead to Morwenna and to Morwenna's children. The nursery was the next stone in that wall. She had decided, that spring, that the old upper room should be given over to Lady Verena's use as a private apartment when she was in residence, and that little Bram should be moved down to a modern suite on the family floor. Brighter, she said, and warmer and closer to his cousins, all of which was true and none of which was the reason. The reason was that she could not abide a shrine to a dead woman standing at the top of a stair in a house she meant to own, and she could not abide that the king's soft old heart had put his grandson to sleep inside it. She had raised it with the king directly once at the turning of the season, and the king had said no. He had said it kindly, the way he said most things to her in those years, but he had said it, and the matter should have ended there. It did not end there because women like Morwenna do not hear a king's no as an ending. They hear it as a negotiating position. She had waited a fortnight. She had chosen a morning when the king was expected to be away at the reviewing of the household cavalry, expected, but not, as it happened, gone. The review had been put off an hour, and he had used the hour to walk his own galleries, which is why he came upon us when he did. And she had come down to the east colonnade with a cloak-bearer, and a lady and every intention of simply having the rooms cleared, the boys' things carried down, the shrine broken. The current advanced one more stone, before the king returned, and found it a settled thing not worth the quarrel of undoing. The only obstacle between the Queen Consort and that quiet victory was a written order lodged in the steward's cabinet, and a guardsman named Edrin Hale standing his post at a plain oak door. I did not know most of that in the colonnade, but the king knew all of it. He had known it, I think, from the moment he saw his wife's procession turn down the east colonnade toward the one door in the palace she had no business approaching. And that is why he did not go on to his cavalry review, and that is why he came so quietly, and that is why, when her hand went up, he was already close enough to catch it. Now let me go back to the colonnade, to the long moment after the king let go of her wrist and stepped between us, because that moment did not resolve itself the way the palace stories later claimed. In the stories it is a single thunderclap. The king intervenes, the queen is disgraced, the guardsman is vindicated, curtain. The truth was slower and stranger, and to my mind, far more to the king's credit, because a lesser man would have taken the thunderclap. The king took the harder road. "Leave us," he said, but not to me. He said it to the lady of the household and to the man with the cloak, and there was no anger in it, only the flat finality of a command that will be obeyed. The two of them rose from their curtsy and their knee and went backward down the colonnade with the grateful speed of people released from a burning building, and their footsteps faded, and then it was only the four of us in the long gray gallery, the king, the Queen Consort, myself, and the sealed door. I say four because the door was a party to it. It stood there behind me, plain and shut, and everything in that gallery bent around it like water around a stone. "Morwenna," the king said, "look at his face." She did not want to. I watched her not want to. Her chin was up and her color was still high, and her eyes were fixed on her husband with the fixed brightness of a woman assembling, at speed, the version of events she would need, the version in which the guardsman had been insolent, in which she had been provoked, in which the raised hand was a thing that had happened to her rather than a thing she had done. I had seen that assembling before in lesser people, and I knew its shape. "Look at him," the king said again, and something in the second saying made her look. She looked at me. I stood at attention with my eyes forward. I did not meet her gaze, it was not mine to meet, and I felt her look travel over the side of my face, the cheek she had meant to strike, the strap of the bearskin, the collar of the king's coat, and I do not know what she saw there. I hope she saw nothing. I hope she saw the wall. A wall gives an angry person nothing to push against, and the giving of nothing is, in the end, the only weapon a guardsman is permitted, and it is a heavier one than it looks. "He gave you the truth," the king said quietly. "The door is under my order. He told you so. He offered to send for the captain and the steward and to seek my leave, which he could not know I was 50 feet away to give or withhold in person. He did everything the law of this house asked of him, and one thing more. He stood there and let you raise your hand to him, because the law of this house also forbids him to lift his against yours, and he obeyed that law too, when a lesser man would have caught your wrist himself and been within any human right to do it." The king paused. "Do you understand what you nearly did? You nearly struck a man whose whole discipline was to let you. That is not power, Morwenna. That is the opposite of power. That is the thing power does when it has forgotten what it is for." She found her voice then, and it was the voice of the assembled version, and it came out smooth and wounded. "He humiliated me, Alaric, in front of my own people. He refused a plain request, and lectured me on orders and chains of command, as though I were a scullery maid who had wandered into the wrong corridor. What would you have had me do? Thank him. I would have had you not raise your hand, the king said. That is a very small thing to ask of a queen. There are children in this house who manage it. The word children landed on her like a slap of its own, and I understood, standing there, that the king had chosen it on purpose, and that between these two people it carried a freight far heavier than its 6 letters, because the whole quarrel behind the door was a quarrel about a child, about which children this house existed to protect, and whose. She heard the freight, her face changed. The wounded smoothness cracked, and beneath it, for just an instant I saw the thing that drove her, and it was not simple cruelty. It was a kind of starved, furious fear, the fear of a woman who had climbed her whole life and could not, even now, even married to a king, even mistress of the greatest house in Eldermore, believe that the ground beneath her would hold. People who cannot believe the ground will hold spend their lives grabbing at the furniture, and the late queen's nursery was, to her, one more piece of furniture to grab before the floor gave way. I did not pity her. She had raised her hand to strike a man for standing his lawful post, and no amount of understanding her fear unmakes that. But I saw the fear, and seeing it, I understood the king a little better, because a lesser man would have crushed her there in the colonnade and been cheered for it, and the king did not crush her. He held her at the edge of the cliff and made her look down. I am going to tell you what is going to happen, the king said, and you are going to listen, and then we are going to go on with our lives, because you are my wife and this is our house, and I have no wish to break either of those things over a nursery door. But hear me, Morwenna, hear every word. And here I must break the scene, because the king did not finish that sentence in the colonnade. He was interrupted, and by the one person in all of Harrogate who could have interrupted the king of Eldermore mid-sentence and not been rebuked for it. A door opened at the far end of the gallery, up near the sealed arch, and small quick feet came down the stair on the wrong side of the oak door, the inside, and a voice, high and reedy and thickened with the stammer that came on him when his nerves were up, called down into the gray light. "Grandfather! Is that grandfather?" It was Bram. He had been asleep, or half asleep, in the old nursery at the top of the sealed stair, and the raised voices had reached him through the floor, and he had done what a frightened 6-year-old does. He had gone toward the one voice in the house he trusted absolutely. There was a second door at the top of that stair, a private one, that connected the nursery to the governess's small room, and the governess, hearing the commotion, had unlocked it, and the boy had slipped past her and come down the inner steps in his nightshirt with his red hair standing up on one side and a stuffed gray rabbit, threadbare with love, hanging from one hand. He came out through the small inner door beside the great sealed one. I heard the latch. I heard the governess's soft, alarmed Bram, wait. And then he was in the colonnade with us, blinking in the gray light, a very small figure at the foot of that long, cold gallery, and he stopped when he saw the 3 grown people standing so still and so strangely arranged, the way children stop when they walk into the middle of something they can feel but cannot name. The king turned, and I watched a thing happen to King Alaric of Eldermore's face that I had seen perhaps twice in 10 years of guarding him. The stern, terrible stillness went out of it all at once, and something else came up from underneath. The man beneath the king, the grandfather, the one who had lost a wife and half, raised a grieving son, and now stood between that son's frightened child and the woman who wanted the boy's room. It was there for only a second. Then he mastered it, because a king masters his face the way a guardsman masters his body, but I had seen it, and I do not think I was meant to. "It is grandfather," the king said, and his voice, which a moment before had frozen a queen, came out warm and easy and unhurried. "Come here, Bram, it's only us." The boy looked at the king, and then at the Queen Consort, and I saw him go still in a different way, a wariness, a small animal calculation. He knew her. Of course he knew her. She lived in his house. but he knew her the way a small creature knows the large one that has never quite decided to be kind, and he did not go to the king straight past her. He edged along the far wall, the rabbit clutched to his chest, keeping the width of the gallery between himself and Morwenna, and only when he had cleared her did he cross the open floor at a run and fold himself against the king's side. The king put a hand on the boy's head. He did not pick him up. Bram was 6, not 2, and had his pride, but he laid a broad hand over the standing-up red hair and drew him in against the tall, dark length of his coat, and the boy pressed his face against the king's side and stood there breathing. And over the top of the boy's head, King Alaric looked at his wife. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The whole quarrel was standing there in the gray light made flesh. The woman who wanted the room and the small red-headed reason the room could not be given, and between them the king with his hand on the boy's head. Every word the king had been about to say was said better by the silence and the picture it made. "This is what you reached for," the silence said. "This is the door you would have had opened. This is the thing your hand went back to defend against a guardsman's no." If there was a moment when the Queen Consort might have been won back, might have set down her long climb and become, even a little, a different woman, it was that one, with the boy's face hidden and the king's silent gaze on her. She might have crossed the floor. She might have knelt to the height of the child and said one kind and human thing, and the king, I am certain, would have met her halfway across it with everything in him. She did not cross it. I watched her look at the boy, and I watched the fear come up in her again, because the boy to her was not a grandson to be comforted. He was the living proof that Isolde's line came first in this house and always would, that whatever she built, this small red-headed obstacle stood at the top of the stair and would grow into a man and would remember always that she had come for his room. And I watched the fear harden under the king's gaze into the thing that fear hardens into when a person will not face it. It hardened into grievance, into the certainty that she was the one being wronged. "So this is how it is," she said quietly. "The whole house arranged around a dead woman and her children's children, and I am to stand in the corner and be grateful. I see it now. I have always seen it. I simply hoped—" She stopped. She drew herself up. The Queen Consort came back down over the frightened woman like a visor lowered. "I hoped I was wrong." And she turned, and she walked away down the east colonnade, her hard heels striking the stone, and she did not look back at the king or the boy or the door or me, and the sound of her going was the loudest thing in that gallery for a long time after she was gone. The king stayed a while with the boy. I stood my post. It is a strange thing to guard a door while 3 feet away. A king crouches at last to the height of his grandson and speaks to him low and steady about nothing at all, about the gray rabbit, whether he had slept, whether he had heard the almond trees were in bloom, would he like to walk down and see them after breakfast, and the boy's small voice comes and goes, the stammer easing as the king's calm settled over him. I heard all of it. I was not meant to be there, in the sense that matters. A good guardsman is furniture, and furniture does not hear. So I heard, and I have kept it, and I set it down here only because the whole of what this story is about, the whole of why the king did what he did next, is in that low voice at the height of a child. When the governess had come, white-faced and apologizing, and gathered the boy back up the inner stair, and the small feet had gone up and the private door had shut, the king straightened. He looked older standing up than he had crouching down. The years came back into him all at once. He turned to me. "Guardsman," he said, "your name?" "Edrin Hale, your majesty." "How long at that door, Hale?" "On this post since the 6th hour, sire. In the guard 10 years." He nodded slowly. He looked at the door and then at me, and I braced, not for punishment. A guardsman learns the difference between a man deciding to punish and a man deciding to weigh. King Alaric was weighing. "You know what she can do to you," he said. "It was not a question. You knew it when you refused her. A queen consort does not forget a man who tells her no in front of her own household. You knew, standing there, that even if I never came, Even if the door held and the order held and you did everything exactly right, you had likely just ended your good posts and begun your bad ones. You knew all of that and you refused her anyway, and you stood there and let her raise her hand. Why? I have been asked over the years to explain that morning to a great many people, and to most of them I have given the short answer, which is true as far as it goes. I had an order. But the king was not most people, and the king had crouched to the height of a child in front of me, which is a kind of honesty a man does not offer lightly, and I found I could not give him the short answer. Because the order was right, sire, I said. Not only lawful, right. I did not know the whole of the reason this morning. I know it better now from what I have seen in this gallery, but I have stood that post before, and I have heard the boy's feet on the stair above me at night when he cannot sleep, and I have learned what that door keeps. A man can stand a lawful order he does not understand. It is a great deal easier to stand one he has come to believe in. I believed in the door, Your Majesty. I would have stood it if she had brought the whole household to unmake me. The king looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Yes, he said. I see that you would. And then half to himself. There are not so many men left who will stand a right thing at a cost to themselves. I have collared and pensioned a good number of the other kind. I did not expect to find one of these at a nursery door on a Tuesday. He gathered his coat. Stand your post, Hale. The order holds. And do not fear for your good postings. That matter is mine now, and I do not forget the other kind of thing either, the kind you did this morning. He went, and I stood my post, and the almond trees down in the walled garden shed their pale petals onto the late Queen's paths, and I thought the whole matter had ended there. It had not ended there. It had, in the way of these things, only changed rooms. Because a Queen Consort who has walked away down a colonnade with her grievance hardened into certainty does not go quietly up to bed. She goes to work. And the work Morwenna went to, in the days that followed, was the slow, patient work she was better at than anyone in that house, the work of arranging the story. I learned of it the way a guardsman learns of everything, which is by standing still in doorways while people who have forgotten he is a person talk past him. By the second day there was a version of the morning traveling the corridors of Harrogate, and it was a very good version, and it went like this. A guardsman of low origin and high opinion of himself had grown insolent at his post, had refused the Queen Consort a simple, reasonable request to have some old unused rooms aired and reassigned, had lectured her before her own household, in a tone no servant should use to a queen, had, some said, all but dared her to do something about it. And the poor queen, provoked past bearing by this jumped-up sentry, had raised her hand as any of us might in a moment of temper, and had been publicly shamed for it by a king who, the version went, growing bolder as it traveled, had always favored his first wife's memory over his living queen, and had seized on the incident to humiliate Morwenna before the household and remind her of her place. It was, I will grant her, a masterpiece. Every element was a true thing bent slightly out of true. She had made a reasonable request to a locked and sealed room. I had spoken plainly of orders and chains of command. The king had intervened to stop a blow. Each fact, taken alone, could be nodded at. Only the shape they made together was a lie, and shapes are hard to argue with, because to argue with a shape you must lay out all the facts again in their right order. And by then, the person you are arguing with has stopped listening and gone to repeat the wrong shape to someone else. By the third day, the shape had a champion. Lord Cassius, the Queen Consort's grown son, came down from the capital where he kept his expensive rooms and his thin patients, and he came, I have no doubt, at his mother's summons, and he came in the mood of a man who has been told that a family insult wants avenging and has decided the avenging will be a pleasant morning sport. I knew Cassius. Every guardsman in Harrogate knew Cassius. He was one of the other kind, the kind the king had spoken of pensioning, a man who had never in his life stood a right thing at a cost to himself, and who therefore could not imagine that anyone else had, and who looked at my refusal at the door and saw not discipline but impertinence, the impertinence of a servant who had forgotten his station and wanted teaching. He found me at the door on the fourth morning. He did not come alone. He came with 2 men of his own household, and with the particular loud confidence of a man who has an audience and a grievance and no fear of consequence, and he planted himself in front of my post in almost exactly the spot his mother had stood, and he looked me up and down as though pricing a horse he intended to have whipped. "You are the sentry," he said, "who made my mother raise her hand." It was a beautiful piece of language, that sentence. Who made my mother raise her hand, as though I had reached across and lifted her arm myself, as though the raising of a hand were a thing done to a person rather than by them. The whole wrong shape was folded into those 7 words, and Cassius said them with relish and waited for me to flinch. I did not flinch. I gave him what I had given his mother, the wall, the eyes forward, the silence that is not sullen but simply the correct silence of a man who has not been ordered to speak. This enraged him more than any answer could have. Men like Cassius are not truly after obedience. Obedience bores them. They are after the small pleasure of watching another man bend, and a wall denies them that, and the denial is intolerable to them, and so they push and push, until either it gives them their pleasure or they break themselves against it. The whole shape of the arrogance the king had named in the colonnade. I stood there 4 mornings after the mother, and watched the sun begin the same slow walk toward the same cliff. "Nothing to say." Cassius circled me, a slow, insolent circle, hands behind his back, playing to his 2 men. "No, of course not. That is the whole trick of you people, isn't it? You stand there like a post and you make the rest of us do the shouting, and then when we've been provoked into losing our tempers, you've won, haven't you, because you never said a word and everyone remembers the shout and forgets the sneer that earned it." He came round in front of me again. "But I am not my mother. My mother has a temper, I do not. I am very, very patient, and I have come to tell you, sentry, that you are going to be moved off this door, today, this afternoon. I have spoken to the steward. There has been a review of the postings, and it has been decided, after your recent conduct, that this sensitive post wants a steadier man. You'll be sent to the outer gate to salute tourists in the rain. And this door," he smiled, and turned to look at the oak, "this door is going to be opened, and those foolish rooms are going to be cleared, and my sister is going to have a decent apartment for once instead of camping in the servants' end of the house, while a shrine to a woman 30 years dead moulders at the top of a stair. And there is not one thing you or your precious order can do about it, because the man who signed your order is not going to be in this house tomorrow. He leaves at dawn for the border review, and by the time he returns, it will all be quietly done, and he is far too dignified to make a fuss over furniture that has already been moved. Now I want to stop here, because this is the false dawn, and it is worth understanding as one." Everything Cassius said was calculated to be true enough to land. There had been a review of the postings. His mother had seen to it, and had leaned on the steward, and the steward was a decent enough man but not a brave one, and had let a paper be drawn up moving me off the door pending inquiry into the incident. I knew nothing of it until Cassius told me, standing there smiling. The king was leaving at dawn for the border, that was true. The review he had put off the morning of the colonnade had only been put off, not cancelled, and the border matter was a real one that could not wait. And the plan was, in its cold way, sound. Move the guardsman, open the door, clear the rooms, present it all as a settled thing before the king returned, and trust to the king's dignity, his hatred of unmaking a done thing over a domestic quarrel, to let it stand. It was, in short, the reasonable but wrong middle path that the false dawn always offers. It would have worked on a lesser house. It very nearly worked on this one. I said nothing to Cassius. There was nothing to say that would not have handed him the pleasure he wanted, and there was one thing to do, which was not mine to do at my post, and so I did the only correct thing. At the change of the watch, when Torvin came to relieve me, I gave him the door, and I signed the book, and I went not to my quarters and not to sulk, but straight down the service stair and across the inner court to the small stone office where the captain of the guard kept his hours, and I laid the whole of it before him, plainly, in order, the way my old captain had taught me a true thing must be laid. The captain of the guard of Harrowgate was a lean grey man named Osric Vale, who had been a soldier under the king in the old wars and owed his post to nothing but merit, and who had exactly no love for Lord Cassius or the Queen Consort's whole quiet campaign, though he was far too disciplined ever to have said so. He listened to me without a word. When I had finished, he sat for a moment with his hands flat on his desk. "The posting review," he said. "I've seen the paper. It came up from the steward's office 2 days ago with a recommendation that you be moved off the east colonnade door pending inquiry. It wanted only my signature to take effect." He looked at me. "I have not signed it. I have been sitting on it because it stank, and now you have told me why it stank, and I am not going to sign it. But hear me, Hale, I can refuse to sign it. I cannot, by myself, stop what Cassius means to do at that door once you are moved and a softer man is on it, because the steward can move a guardsman on his own authority whether I like it or not, and there are 3 or 4 men in this guard soft enough to open a door when a lord stands over them and says the king won't mind. The order that seals the door is the king's. Only the king, or a lie about the king's wishes, can move it, and the king leaves at dawn." "Then the king must be told before dawn," I said. Vale looked at me a long moment. "You want me to go to the king, tonight, on the eve of the border review, and tell him that his wife and her son are planning to open a sealed door behind his back while he's away, on the word of 1 guardsman." "On the word of 2, sir," I said. "You saw the paper, you know it stank, and I will stand behind every word of mine before the king himself if he wishes to hear it." The captain almost smiled. It did not reach his mouth, but it reached his eyes, and I understood that I had passed some test I had not known I was sitting. "You know what you're asking," he said. "You're asking me to make the king choose, publicly, on the eve of a journey, between his household's peace and 1 sealed door. Kings do not thank you for making them choose, even when they choose right." "I know it, sir," I said. "But the door was sealed to keep a promise to the boy, and the boy did not ask for the promise, and cannot defend it. And if the men who made it will not stand it when standing it is costly, then it was never a promise at all. It was only a convenience that lasted as long as it cost nothing. I would rather be the guardsman who made the king choose than the guardsman who let the door be opened, because making him choose was uncomfortable." Osric Vale stood up from his desk. "Come with me," he said. "We are going to the king." We did not reach the king that night. This is the part of the story I have never been able to make sound like anything but bad luck, and yet I have come to believe it was not bad luck at all, but the exact turn the whole thing needed, because a story in which the guardsman simply tells the king and the king fixes everything is a story about a king, and this, in the end, is not a story about a king. It is a story about who stands the door when the king is not there. The king was gone, not at dawn, gone that very night. A rider had come up from the border with news that would not keep, some matter of a bridge and a disputed crossing, and a foreign column sitting where it had no leave to sit. And the king, who had been a soldier and could not sleep with a thing like that unresolved, had ridden out at dusk with a light escort rather than wait for the morning column. By the time Captain Vale and I crossed the inner court to the king's apartments, the king's rooms were dark, and his valet was folding the last of his traveling things, and the king himself was 6 miles down the border road in the dark. Captain Vale stood in the empty doorway of the king's apartments for a moment, and I saw him do the arithmetic that I had already done. The king was gone. The order that sealed the door was the king's, and the king could not be reached before morning, and morning was when Cassius meant to have me moved and the door opened. There was no king now between the Queen Consort's son and the late queen's nursery. There was only the captain of the guard and 1 guardsman, and a paper the steward could sign in an hour. "Well," Vale said quietly, then it falls to us. I have been a soldier's man all my life, and I have heard a great many stirring things said by men in dark doorways, and most of them were said to make the sayer feel brave. Vale did not say it to feel brave. He said it the way a man reads out a bill he now has to pay. It falls to us. 3 flat words, and in them the whole weight of the thing sliding off the king's absent shoulders and onto ours. And then Osric Vale, captain of the guard, did the thing that made me follow him for the rest of my years in that house, the thing that separates the men who wear authority from the men who merely hold it. He did not throw up his hands. He did not say, "The king is gone, my hands are tied, come back in the morning." He sat down, there in the dark antechamber outside the king's cold rooms, and he began, quietly and methodically, to plan. "The steward can move you off the door," he said, "but he cannot move you off it in a way I cannot answer, because the guard is mine, not his, and a posting is only valid when it is entered in the guard book under my hand." He drew a paper. "He cannot make it a posting without me. So, first, you do not go off that door tomorrow. I will not enter the change. If Cassius's soft men are sent to relieve you, they will find that the roster has you on that post through the king's return, signed Vale, and any man who takes the door against a standing roster is deserting his own. I will see him broken for it, lord or no lord standing over him. Second, the order sealing the door is the king's, and I cannot lift it and I will not, but I can do a thing the king would do if he were here, and I will answer to him for it when he returns. I can post the door in strength, not one man. 6. Yourself and 5 I will choose myself. The 5 in this guard I would trust at my own back, and I will stand the watch with you. Let Lord Cassius bring his 2 household bravos and his paper and his smile to a door held by 6 king's men and the captain of the guard, and let us see how patient he is then. I felt something go through me that I had not felt since the old wars. The particular lift a soldier feels when a good officer has just turned a losing position into a defensible one by nothing, but refusing to accept that it was lost. "And when he goes to the steward," I said, "and the steward comes himself with the paper and orders the door opened in the Queen Consort's name." Vale was quiet a moment. "Then we have a harder morning. The steward is the household's man and outranks me in the running of the house, and if he comes in person and gives a lawful household order to open a domestic door, I am on thinner ice refusing him than I am refusing Cassius. But even then, Hale, even then there is the order. The king's sealed order names who may open that door, and the steward is not on it, and a household order cannot overrule a sovereign one, and I will make the steward say, out loud in front of 6 witnesses, that he is setting aside the king's own written seal on his own authority while the king is 6 miles away and cannot be asked. I do not think he will say it. He is not a brave man, but he is not a fool, and a man who sets aside the king's seal behind the king's back had better be very sure the king will forgive him, and no one who has served Alaric these 30 years is sure of any such thing." He stood. "Go and sleep 3 hours, then come to the armory. We change the watch on the east colonnade door at the 4th hour in the dark, before Cassius or the steward or any of them are awake, and when the morning comes they will find the ground already held." I did not sleep 3 hours. I do not think any man in that guard slept. Once the word went round, quietly, the way word goes round a good guard, that the captain himself was standing a nursery door against the Queen Consort's son. I lay on my cot and thought about the boy at the top of the stair with his gray rabbit, and about the king 6 miles down a dark road with a bridge on his mind, not knowing that behind him his house had quietly gone to battle stations over a door. And I thought about the Queen Consort the most. A lesser antagonist would simply have been beaten, and this one would not be beaten simply. A woman who could build the shape she had built in 3 days, who could bend a steward and summon a son, and turn a raised hand into a grievance the household was starting to nod at, was not going to be stopped by 6 guardsmen at a door. She was going to find the seam. Her whole life had been the finding of seams. I lay in the dark trying to think where the seam in our defense was, and could not find it. and that frightened me more than Cassius's smile ever had, because I knew she would. I was right. She found it before dawn, and it was not a seam any of us had thought to guard, because it was not in the door at all. It was in the boy. Here is what she did, and I set it down carefully, because it was the cruelest thing she did in the whole affair, and also, in its way, the moment she lost, though none of us knew it yet, least of all her. The order sealed the door against everyone but a short list of persons: the king, the crown prince, the children's governess, and the physician. It did not and could not seal the boy inside. The boy could come and go by the private inner stair, through the governess's room, and the boy was 6 and frightened and slept badly, and had learned in 3 days of raised voices that his room had become the center of some storm he could not understand. And the Queen Consort, who missed nothing, who had watched the boy edge along the far wall of the colonnade to keep the width of the gallery between them, the Queen Consort understood, better than any of us guarding the oak door, that the way to open a sealed room is not to break the seal. It is to empty the room. In the small hours, while Captain Vale gathered his 5 men in the armory, and I stood the last of my 3 sleepless hours, a message went up the inner stair to the old nursery. Not from Morwenna herself, she was far too careful for that. It went through Lady Verena, her daughter, the very daughter the room was meant to be cleared for, who came up the private stair in her nightclothes with a candle and a soft, sisterly manner, and sat on the edge of the boy's bed and told him a story. The story was this: that grandfather had had to go away in the night to fight a battle at the border, and might be gone a long time, and that while he was gone the house was going to be a frightening place, full of shouting men and guns at the doors. She had seen the guardsmen gathering, oh so many of them, all around Bram's very door, and that it was not safe for a little boy to be at the top of a lonely stair with all those armed men below. If Bram were a brave boy, a truly brave boy, he would come down of his own accord tonight quietly and sleep in the nice bright rooms near his cousins, where his Aunt Verena could look after him until grandfather came home. She would help him carry his things. It would be their secret, a brave boy's secret, and in the morning everyone would be so proud of how brave he had been. It was a small masterpiece, like the shape she had built of the colonnade, every element true enough to land. Grandfather had gone in the night. There were armed men gathering at the door, our men, our defense, turned in the telling into the very danger the boy was to be saved from. And the ask was not cruel on its face. It was, on its face, kind. Come down where it's safe, brave boy. Only its shape was a lie, because the whole purpose of it was to have the boy empty the room of his own accord, so that when morning came and Cassius arrived with his paper, there would be no boy to defend, no promise standing at the top of the stair, only some empty old rooms full of a dead woman's furniture that no one was using, and who could object to airing out empty rooms. If the boy had gone down, we would have lost. I have thought about it a great deal, and I am sure of it. 6 men and a captain can hold a door against a lord and a paper. They cannot hold a door against the simple fact that the room behind it is empty, and the child it was sealed to protect has been persuaded, by a soft voice and a candle, to leave it. The whole moral force of the thing that made the steward afraid to sign, the thing that would make the king's face go still, was the boy at the top of the stair. Empty the stair and you empty the meaning, and once a thing has no meaning left, moving its furniture is only tidying. The boy did not go down. And the reason he did not go down is the reason this is not, in the end, a story about a king, or even about a captain and 6 good men, though I would follow every one of them into fire. It is a story about a small, frightened person who, when a soft voice told him a brave boy would leave, understood, in the wordless way that children sometimes understand the exact thing the grown people around them have talked themselves out of understanding, that the brave thing and the leaving were not the same, and might even be opposite. Bram listened to Lady Verena. He let her help him fold 2 shirts into a little case, because he was 6, and did not know how to refuse a grown person to her face. And then he asked in his reedy stammering voice whether they could bring the window seat down too, and the low shelf of books and the whole room, because, he said, it was his grandmother's room, and grandfather had told him, the very morning of the shouting, that this was the one room in the whole house that no one was allowed to change, that it would always be here exactly like this, waiting no matter what, and that Bram was its keeper now. Lady Verena, who was not a monster, only a woman raised by one, said that of course they couldn't bring the whole room, don't be silly, it's just furniture, and the boy could have all new nicer things downstairs. And Bram, I have this from the governess, who was pretending to be asleep in the next room and heard every word, and who told me weeks later with her eyes shining. Bram put the 2 folded shirts back in the drawer, one at a time, and closed the drawer and climbed back into his bed and said, with the particular immovable calm that small children can summon exactly once or twice in a childhood, "Then I'll stay. Because somebody has to keep it," grandfather said. Lady Verena tried a while longer. The boy would not be moved. He had found, in his 6-year-old way, the same thing I had found at the door, and the captain had found in the dark antechamber, that there was a right thing, and that it cost something to stand it, and that standing it anyway was the whole of what standing it meant. She went back down the stair with her candle and her failure, and she told her mother, and I do not know what passed between them, but I know that the Queen Consort's last good plan died there in the small hours, killed by a 6-year-old who would not leave his grandmother's room. We did not know any of this at the door. We learned it after. At the 4th hour in the dark, Captain Vale and his 5 and I changed the watch on the east colonnade, and we posted the door in strength, 3 men to each side of the oak with the captain at the center and myself at his right hand, and we settled in to hold it against whatever the morning brought. We did not know the boy had already held it, up above us, better than we ever could. We only knew our orders and our post. But I have thought since that there were 2 doors sealed that night. The oak one below, held by soldiers, and a smaller one above, held by a child, and that of the 2, his was the harder post, and he stood it without a rifle or a captain or an order, on nothing but a promise his grandfather had made him and he had decided to keep. Morning came gray over the walled garden, and with the morning came Lord Cassius, and behind Lord Cassius, pale and unhappy and carrying the fatal paper, came the steward of the household, and the last act of the affair began. Cassius stopped when he saw the door. I wish I could have painted his face in that moment for you. He had come expecting a single soft guardsman to be swept aside by a paper and a lord's confidence, and he found instead 6 king's men in dress order, motionless, 3 to each side of the oak, and at their center the lean gray figure of the captain of the guard himself, Osric Vale, with the king's own commission on his breast and 30 years of the old wars in his stillness. The 2 household bravos Cassius had brought with him took one look at that and stopped a full 10 paces back, because bravos know the difference between a soft man they can lean on and a captain who will break them, and they wanted no part of the second. "Captain Vale," Cassius said, and to his credit his voice barely wobbled, "this is a surprise. I had not expected the captain of the guard to trouble himself with a matter of household furniture." "It is not a matter of furniture, my lord," Vale said. "It is a matter of a sealed door, and sealed doors are exactly what the captain of the guard troubles himself with. What is your business here?" Cassius recovered. He was, whatever else, quick on his feet, and he had a paper, and a paper gives a certain kind of man a courage that nothing else could. He half turned and drew the steward forward with a small gesture, the way you present a witness. "The steward has business here. Not I merely accompany him. Steward, if you please, explain to the good captain what has been decided." The steward of the household was a heavy, gray, decent man named Padraic, who had run the house's 10,000 daily small matters for 20 years, and had never, in all that time, wanted to stand where he was standing now. He was sweating in the cold morning. He held the paper in both hands as though it might bite him. "Captain," he said, "there has been a review of the domestic arrangements. It has been decided at the Queen Consort's instance that the upper rooms of the east stair, being long disused and unsuited to a growing household, are to be aired and reassigned. I have here the household order for the opening of the door. It wants only the guard's cooperation, if your men would stand aside." He did not meet Vale's eyes. He was reading the words off a version he had been given, the wrong shape once more, and I think even as he said them, he heard how thin they sounded in the gray air outside a door held by 7 men. "Long disused," said Vale mildly, "unsuited to a growing household. My Lord Steward, there is a child of the blood asleep at the top of that stair not 200 feet above your head. The rooms are neither disused nor unsuited. They are occupied by the king's grandson by the king's own arrangement under the king's own sealed order. You know this. You drew up the seal yourself 12 years ago at the king's word. I have read it. Your hand is on it." Vale let that sit. Then quietly, "Read me the order in your hands, my lord, out loud. Read me the part that lifts the king's seal." The steward's mouth opened. Nothing came out, because there was no such part. The household order Morwenna had bent him into drawing could reassign rooms and air out chambers and move furniture, but it could not, on its own authority, lift a sovereign seal, and every man standing in that colonnade knew it, and the steward knew it best of all, because he had drawn the seal himself. "You cannot read it," Vale said, "because it is not in there. A household order does not lift the king's seal. Only the king lifts the king's seal. So I will ask you very plainly, my Lord Steward, and I want your answer clear, because I will be asked to repeat it to the king the hour he returns, and I intend to repeat it exactly." He took one step forward. "Are you, on your own authority, while the king is 6 miles gone and cannot be asked, setting aside his written sealed order for the protection of his grandson's rooms, because the Queen Consort wishes the furniture moved? Say it. If that is what you are doing, say it out loud in front of these 6 men, and I will stand my men down, and it will be on your head and not mine. Say it." There was a silence in the east colonnade that I can feel still, all these years later, the way you feel the memory of standing at the edge of a great height. The steward Padrek looked at the paper. He looked at Vale. He looked for a long moment at the sealed oak door, behind which a small red-headed keeper slept over the room he had refused in the night to leave. And the decent man in him, the man who had run the house honestly for 20 years and had let himself, for 3 bad days, be bent by a queen's grievance into carrying a paper he was ashamed of, the decent man came back up through the sweating, unhappy courtier, and won. "No," said the steward, "no, I am not." His hands came down, the paper hung loose at his side. "God help me, Captain, I have let myself be made a fool and worse than a fool. I will not set aside the king's seal. I withdraw the household order. The door stays sealed until the king himself lifts it by his own hand, and I will go this hour and put my withdrawal in writing so there can be no doubt of it." And Lord Cassius, watching his last instrument crumble, did the thing that men of his kind always do when patience fails and the paper fails and the soft men fail. The thing his mother had done in the colonnade 4 mornings before, because it is the same disease in the blood. He lost his temper. "You spineless old fool," Cassius said to the steward, and his voice cracked up out of its studied patience into something ugly and shaking. "You had one thing to do." He rounded on Vale. "And you, a captain of the guard, taking the side of a jumped-up sentry against the Queen Consort of Eldermore. Do you imagine my mother will forget this? Do you imagine any of you will keep your posts a month past the king's return? I will have this door opened. I will have it opened now." And he strode forward past the steward, past the captain, straight at the door at me, for I stood nearest the lock with his hand out for the ring of keys at my belt, exactly as his mother had reached for them 4 mornings before, and I understood that the whole affair had come round in a full circle to end where it began. A member of the Queen Consort's house, out of patience and out of argument, reaching to take by force the thing they could not take by right. I did not move. Once more I gave him the wall, and once more because some patterns in this life are not accidents but the same test offered twice to see whether anyone has learned. A hand closed on Lord Cassius's wrist in the air before he ever reached the keys, and stopped him cold. This time the hand was Captain Vale's, and the captain, unlike the guardsman, was under no order forbidding him to lay hands on a man who assaulted a king's post. "That is enough," said Osric Vale, very quietly, holding the lord's wrist as easily as the king had held the queen's, and there was 30 years of the old wars in the quiet of it. "You will not touch that guardsman, and you will not touch that door, and you will step back, my lord, or I will have you removed from this colonnade by men who will not be gentle about it. You are the son of the Queen Consort. You are not the king, and you are not the law, and in this corridor this morning I am both. Step back." And Cassius, feeling the old iron in that grip and reading in the captain's gray eyes the exact and total absence of fear that he had spent his whole soft life never once encountering, stepped back. His arm dropped. The bravado ran out of him all at once the way water runs out of a cracked jug, and what was left standing in the gray light was only a frightened, spiteful man who had overreached, in front of witnesses, and knew it. "You'll be broken for this," he said, but it was a whisper now, and no one in that colonnade believed it, least of all him. "Perhaps," said Vale, "the king will decide, and the king returns tonight." The king returned that night. The border matter had resolved faster than anyone feared. The foreign column, it turned out, had sat on the wrong side of the bridge through a surveyor's error and not an act of war. And the king, finding a mistake where he had braced for a battle, had turned his escort round and ridden back through the dusk, and came into Harrowgate near midnight with the road dust still on him, wanting nothing but his bed. He did not get his bed. Captain Vale was waiting for him in the courtyard with a lantern and a full account, and the king heard the whole of it standing in the cold, still booted, and did not sit down until it was told. I was not in the courtyard. I was at the door, where I had been, on and off, for the better part of 2 days, because I had refused to leave it until the king himself came home to lift the seal or let it stand. But I heard later from Vale exactly how the king received the account, and I set it down because it is the true measure of the man, and because the palace stories got it wrong the way they got everything wrong. The palace stories say the king raged. They say he stormed to the Queen Consort's apartments in the small hours and thundered at her and threatened her with divorce and disgrace, and I do not know what else. He did none of it. Captain Vale told me the king listened to the whole account without a word, in the cold, and that when it was done he was quiet a long time, and then he said only, "The boy would not leave the room." And Vale said no, sire, he would not. And the king said, "Tell me exactly what he said." And Vale told him, word for word as the governess had it. "Then I'll stay, because somebody has to keep it." Grandfather said asterisk, and the king of Eldermore, who had faced down foreign columns and buried a wife and ruled a kingdom 30 years, stood in his own cold courtyard at midnight with the road dust on him, and put his hand over his eyes, and did not speak again for a while. Then he said, "Take me to him." He went up the east colonnade near 1 in the morning. I was at the door. I have never in my life been so glad to see a man come down a corridor. He stopped when he reached me. He knew me now, by name, and he looked at the 6 men still standing the door, and at the captain, and last of all at me, and he said, "You held it." "We held it, sire." "He would not leave the room," the king said. "It was not a question, but I answered it." "No, your majesty. He said he was its keeper. He said you had told him so." Something worked in the king's face. "I did tell him so," he said. "I did not think he had understood me. I did not think a boy of 6 could carry a thing like that." He looked at the door a moment. "I have kept a great many people from opening this door with orders and seals and captains and guardsmen. And in the end it was held by the one person I sealed it to protect, on nothing but my word, given lightly one morning and kept by him better than I have kept most of the promises of my life. He put his hand on the oak. "Open it, Hale. I want to see him." I turned the key in the lock. The seal was lifted that once by the one man on the order who could lift it, the king himself, and he went up the inner stair alone, and the six of us stood the door below in the dark and heard, faintly, through the floor, the low voice at the height of a child, and a reedy stammering voice answering it, and then a small tired laugh. And that, more than any thunderclap, more than any disgrace, was the true end of the Queen Consort's campaign. A king and his grandson in the middle of the night, in a room that no one had been allowed to change, that would now, after everything, never be changed. The reckoning with the Queen Consort came the next morning, and it came the way everything the king did came, without thunder, and all the heavier for it. He did not summon her to a private room. That was the thing the palace least expected and least understood, and it was the whole of his intention. He gathered the household, not the whole 1,000, but the ones who mattered, the ones through whom the wrong shape of the colonnade had traveled and grown. The senior stewards, the ladies of the Queen Consort's own circle, the captain, Lord Cassius, the steward Padraic, and standing at the side where I was told to stand myself. He gathered them in the very east colonnade where it had begun, before the very door in the gray morning light, and he had the Queen Consort brought there too. And then, in front of all of them, he set the record straight. He did it without cruelty. He simply laid out the true shape against the false one, fact by fact in their right order, and let it stand up in the light where everyone could see it. And the false shape, set beside the true one, simply fell down, because false shapes cannot bear the weight of the real ones once the real ones are assembled. "There is a story in this house," the king said, "that has been 3 days growing, and I have heard it because a king hears everything eventually, and I am going to end it this morning. The story is that a guardsman was insolent, and that the Queen Consort was provoked, and that I humiliated my wife over a domestic trifle out of favor for a dead one. Every part of that story is a true thing turned, so let me turn them all back." And he did. He told them of the sealed order, and why it was sealed, and who slept behind the door, and what promise the seal kept. He told them, without heat, exactly what he had seen from the far arch. A queen raise her hand to a guardsman who had given her nothing but the lawful truth, and who was forbidden by his own oath to defend his own face. He told them of the posting review that stank, and the paper the captain would not sign, and the son who came with 2 bravos and a smile, and the steward who was bent and then, to his lasting honor, unbent. And last and quietest, and the part after which no one in that colonnade could meet the Queen Consort's eyes, he told them of a soft voice and a candle in the small hours, and a message sent up a private stair to persuade a frightened boy of 6 to empty his own grandmother's room of his own accord, so that the moving of it might look like kindness, and of the boy who folded his 2 shirts back into the drawer, one at a time, and would not go. "He is 6 years old," the king said into the silence, and when the whole cleverness of grown people was turned against him, he found the one thing none of them could argue with, which is that a right thing is worth standing at a cost to yourself. A guardsman found it at that door. A captain found it in the dark. A steward found it late, but found it. And a child found it in his bed at 3 in the morning with no one to help him. The only person in this entire affair who never once found it. And here the king looked, for the first and only time, directly at his wife, is the person who, of all of us, had the least excuse not to. He did not disgrace her further than that. He did not need to be measured, out loud before the household, against a guardsman and a captain and a steward and a 6-year-old boy, and to be found the only one who failed the measure. That was a humbling beyond any exile or public stripping of title, because it could not be raged against or reshaped or turned into a grievance. It was simply true, and everyone had heard it, and she would live inside the truth of it for the rest of her days at Harrowgate. The Queen Consort stood very straight through all of it. Whatever else she was not a coward, and she did not weep or protest or attempt, there at the end, to build one last shape. She heard the king out. And when he had finished, she inclined her head, a small, stiff, terrible inclination, the bow of a proud person acknowledging a defeat too total to argue, and she said only, in a voice scraped down to almost nothing, "I understand." And then she asked the king's leave to withdraw, and he gave it, and she withdrew, alone, no procession behind her now, her hard heels striking the stone the length of the colonnade, until the sound of her going faded as it had faded 4 mornings before, except that this time the whole household stood watching her go, and knew. Lord Cassius was gone from Harrowgate by noon, sent back to his expensive rooms in the capital with a short cold letter from the king that I never read but the effect of which I saw. He did not show his face at court again for a full year, and when he did he was a quieter man. The steward Padrek kept his post, and his honor, because the king valued a man who could be bent, and then find the strength to unbend more than a man who had simply never been tested. Captain Osric Vale, who had made the king choose on the eve of a journey and been right to, was not punished for it. The king, some weeks later in front of the guard, called him the finest officer in the house and meant it, and I saw the gray man's eyes when he heard it, and I do not think he had ever expected to be told. And the boy kept his room. That was the whole of it in the end, and it was everything. The old nursery at the top of the east stair was never aired or reassigned or cleared. The window seat stayed where the late Queen Isolde had put it, and the low shelf of books, and the faded blue, and the smell that only a few old servants could still catch of an evening. The king had a new plate cut for the sealed order, and added to the short list of those who might open the door one more name in his own hand below his own: Bram, keeper. The boy was told of it, and I am told he was very grave about the honor, as grave as a 6-year-old can be, and asked whether being a keeper meant he had to sleep there every night, and the king said no, only that the room was his to keep always, and that no one would ever move it. And the boy thought about that, and then asked whether grandfather could be a keeper too, so there would be 2 of them, and the king, I have this from the governess, and I believe it, said yes, that he would like that very much, and had the plate cut again with both their names. As for me, the king did not forget the other kind of thing, as he had said he would not. I was not moved to the outer gate to salute tourists in the rain. I was left on the east colonnade door, at my own request, because I had come to think of it as my post in a way I had not felt about any post before it, and the king granted it, and I stood that door for another 11 years, through the boy's growing and the king's graying, and the long slow settling of a house that had come, one gray morning, closer to breaking than anyone outside those walls ever knew. People still ask me, when they learn I was the guardsman at the door, whether I was not afraid of the Queen Consort's hand, of her son's threats, of losing my place, of the raised palm coming down. And I tell them the truth, which surprises them, because they expect a story about courage, and I give them a story about furniture. I was not standing against her hand. Her hand was nothing. A hand is stopped or it lands, and either way it is over in a breath. I was standing against the thing behind the hand, the long patient current that would move a portrait to a dimmer wall, and pension off an old servant, and empty a boy's room with a candle and a soft voice, and turn a raised palm into a grievance the whole house would nod at, the current that runs, always, in every great house and every small one, toward the day when the things that ought to be kept are quietly moved to please whoever is climbing. That current does not stop for orders or seals or captains. It stops only where it meets something that will not move, a guardsman at a door, a captain in the dark, a steward who finds his spine, a child who will not leave his grandmother's room. The king intervened that morning and stopped a blow 4 inches from my cheek, and the palace tells that as the whole story. The king raised his hand and the queen was humbled and the guardsman was saved. But the king only stopped the hand. What stopped the current was smaller and quieter and came from more people than a king, and the smallest of them, the one with the gray rabbit and the stammer, stood the hardest post of all, alone in the dark, on nothing but a promise. I have stood a great many posts in my years under the crown. That is the one I am proudest to have stood beside. And when they ask me what I did that morning, I tell them the truth, which is the whole of a guardsman's craft and the whole of what the world thinks it understands about us and does not. I did not move. And because I did not move, neither did the door. And because the door did not move, a small red-headed boy still has, at the top of a quiet stair in a great house, one room in all the world that no one will ever be allowed to change. That was enough. It was, in the end, the whole of what I was for.